Recording in progress.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm calling the October 11th Public Health and Safety Committee meeting to order. I guess we'll start with the first agenda item, which is approval of the minutes for September.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Minutes are approved, and then we'll just move on to the action items. We have the draft PAC charge, which was circulated to the committee beforehand. And do we need to give a background at this point? We've kind of gone through this so many times.
Yeah. Has the PAC been given an opportunity to review it? Yeah.
I thought today we were going to forward it on to the PAC for review.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking too. And I would maybe recommend that we not recommend this go to council next week and give the PAC time to review it, and then we could just carry it over till next month to make that recommendation based upon the feedback from PAC to give that to council in November. Be my recommendation.
So we don't necessarily need a motion to forward it on to the PAC.
No.
So this will be just a discussion item for today then. So it's been circulated. I think, Mike, you had just a few comments. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, let me see if I can find my email. Sorry, I'm taking everybody's name out of the minutes and doing this simultaneously. Sorry, I can find my email. I apologize. Get there this
See if I can
fast.
find it.
I remember it had to do a little concern with governance.
Right. I have it here.
Okay.
So you said, in the review of police practices, policies and messaging, you weren't sure about the phrase developing messages out to the community when urgent critical incidents arise.
Right, yeah, so now I remember. So my concern was that if we're in an emergent situation, we don't want to have multiple different groups sending out messaging that might conflict with each other, right? So if there's, I just think about either our incident of, the spray painting or whatever it might be, if there's a bomb threat in the building or something like that. I don't think we want them necessarily putting out messaging in that sort of emergency situation. That should be handled by the mayor, by the police chief, by the professional staff. So that was my only comment.
Yeah, and I don't think that was the intention. So maybe it's just a wording revision that needs to happen for that.
I think maybe there's a role for them to play, and maybe that they could be a part of. I remember the last time, we asked for their input about, before we made that official response. I think.
Well, as an advisory body.
Right.
For.
Not to be the one to actually communicate it, but to actually to be one of the contributing partners in crafting that message.
Right.
It's not a bad idea to have some input, but the message should come from a point person.
Yep.
Otherwise, it's a cluster.
Yep. That was. I didn't put that word
works
in
with the
the.
will of council.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Absolutely.
So maybe it's the way. Let me see if I can look at the exact language. Maybe it's provide solicited input as requested.
Fair enough. Fair enough, as requested. If there is something emergent,
You might not want
I'm
to
gonna
request
do what
it.
I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And without that. But
Yep.
in the having the ability to go to there for a little bit of advice, not a bad idea.
So provide solicited.
Or you can just say provide advice as requested.
Okay.
As requested.
Cindy, did you have anything? No. Okay. The only thing I had to add was to add the number of committee members. So just, I think it's at 5. So we'll just add that. Well, 4 now, but.
Now, do we need more? I mean, we had so many originally because we had such a big kind of ask to look at data and analysis. I don't know if that's right sized. Could you go down to 3? I would suggest that. Again, it kind of at times where we had the planning commission big because we had form-based, there was a big project at hand and you're done that, so.
I would suggest not cutting someone off of the board, because it's a good board, but when there's natural attrition down
Okay.
one, keeping it at 3.
Keeping it 3, yeah, I would
Maybe then
support
the
that.
language, might I recommend the language be minimum of 3, maximum of 5?
Yeah,
That's probably,
Great.
that's
Because
probably.
there, I mean, I can imagine a scenario where you
need
want
Right.
to
Yeah.
do whatever our initial
Correct.
charge was.
Yeah.
Correct.
Again, and you want more.
yeah, I'm comfortable with
Okay,
that.
that sounds fine.
That's good language.
So we'll.
Can I
Of
since you're
course,
talking,
yes.
I know I have a time later on, but since you're talking about this, you said solicited input. I'm just wondering, or requested input. I wanna leave it open, like we had early on, asked you, suggested that you improve the communication, the emergency communication pattern. If there is something that we see that isn't getting pushed out, I wanna make sure that that is also welcome communication.
I think you could always.
I would-
Yeah.
It can be ignored.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I would say that you can always go to, the emergency person and let them know your thoughts. That's always welcome.
Well, because then if it's requested, if you're putting requested in the language.
Yeah, so let's just call it, just provide input. You can even take out
Thank you.
as requested or whatever, because, right? My point was, you're providing the input, not necessarily providing the message.
Absolutely, we should not be
So
broadcasting.
let's just call it providing the input.
Absolutely, that should be one person,
I mean,
Okay.
or maybe two.
or
Police
the
chief
mayor
and
and
the
chief,
mayor.
however they coordinate it.
Okay, so, and then that can be forwarded on to the committee at this time with those changes?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to the next action item then, if there's no more discussion on that, which is expanded parking along Haverford Avenue. Is Mike Schneider?
Yeah,
with
he's
us
on.
today? Okay.
I'm on. Good morning.
Mike?
Hello.
Hi.
So maybe we can start with the, just a walkthrough of the expanded parking on Haverford Avenue, the plans for that. And then I do want to discuss a couple of topics related to that. But go ahead, Mike.
Sure. So we looked at where we could expand and add some parking spaces along Haverford, basically from Essex out to Wynwood. And looking at the locations and some limitations we have along there, including driveways, turning vehicles and emergency vehicles coming through, we think there is room to add, there's existing spaces now, so kind of adding spaces and reconfiguring existing for a total of 40 spaces through that area. They kind of transitioned from one side of the road to the other, depending on where we have driveways or issues with providing on-street parking through there. So we presented that plan. I did get some emailed comments that I answered through that we can talk through those comments or any other comments that come up with the plan. But I think it's a nice addition through there. And again, on-street parking is a great form of traffic calming. So it will help with speeds along there as well. So happy to answer questions or go through any of the previous comments on the plan.
Would it be possible to bring up the plans on the screen?
I don't have the
Oh, no? Okay.
packet up, but I
But
yeah, hold on 1 second.
the plans are in the packet.
Yeah, they're in the packet.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask about the two revisions that I had asked about. One was adding striping to narrow that travel lane to
Yep.
create the traffic calming effect and the shoulder.
Yeah, so basically, I think it's a good comment, and I looked at it. Anywhere where we have room, we could stripe in shoulder. So anywhere we're not providing parking, basically, we can stripe in a shoulder to keep the lanes, keep the travel lane through there appearing narrow to help with traffic calming as well. So it'll be a variable width shoulder through there, but it'll just be forward shoulder striping. We can add that to the plan.
Okay.
So which section do you want to speak to or look at, or?
It's anywhere we have more than a 14-foot travel lane, because that becomes really a highway when it's that
Yep.
wide, I think. So narrowing that travel lane will help with traffic calming.
Yep, that's what I saw. So it's through a good portion of the project where we'd be adding shoulder striping in on one side of the road or the other. Basically, opposite side of the parking. If we don't have parking on both sides, we're going to add shoulder striping in to keep a consistent lane width, a consistent narrow lane width through there.
Okay. Any comments on that?
I think it's a inexpensive way to calm traffic. and it makes sense. And, additional parking is healthy and helpful for our business community. So,
Should we first move and second and then open for discussion?
Well, I guess I'm not sure where we're going to land after, because this is the first time we're actually discussing the plan.
Well, we did say last meeting we would vote on this and get this to council, is my understanding, so I'd like to move that we vote on it to move it to council if there's a second.
So, so there's a couple options here. We can either move to approve the plan as we have it today, or we're talking through a couple revisions, one of which is narrowing the travel lane. And then I also do want to discuss the option of timing this or having this considered alongside the master park plan, just because the whole purpose of this, adding this parking, is to replace some of the reduced parking that might happen if we pedestrianize Station Square.
You're having a discussion that should be part of a motion. Just procedurally, we gotta follow, it's on the agenda. I think
Yeah, so why don't
the agenda is to move, all these things should be part of our discussion after there's been a motion and if there is a second.
So I move to adopt the plan as presented.
I will second it, and then I'm gonna ask Matt a procedural question when we get into discussion.
Okay.
So now it's on the table, now it can be discussed,
Okay.
for as long as you like.
Yeah.
So there was the other thing was that I had commented about was if we could add just a possible bike lane. I'm sorry, not a bike lane, but bike marking at the intersection of Wynwood and Haverford.
Yeah, I think that's, so we're proposing sharrows throughout, and essentially what we do is we go up to the turn lanes at Wynwood and add sharrows in there, kind of describing those as bike turn lane lanes as well. The other option that was pointed out in the email was a bike box, but that's a little bit, typically a bike box is more when you have an official striped bike lane, and where you sort of end that at the turn lane, you kind of bring it in and accentuate it. So since we're doing this without a bike lane, more with sharrows, I'd recommend adding the sharrows to the arrow and only turning movements up at the intersection, which we can add onto the plan pretty easily.
Hey Mike, do you have the plan up on your screen? Would you mind sharing so you can kind of like, as you're speaking, just point to where you're talking, just for everybody here in the room? Yeah.
Let me bring it up. I don't have it up right now.
I guess, Mike, while you do that, my comment about the master park plan is that it's just that. It's a plan that is years to come to fruition. And right now, we have businesses saying we need parking. Right now, we have a speedway through Haverford. I think to punt this years down the road for a plan that is aspirational or inspirational at this time, and you're talking about striping that our public works is going to do. You know, if this was manipulating the physical environment and really investing in infrastructure with tax dollars that we said, hey, you know what, we may actually redo this in a couple of years with the park plans, I'd be a little more hesitant, but that's not what we're saying. We're talking about striping in-house to respond to a need of our residents, which I know some council folks disagree with, but the reality is residents come to us concerned about parking and speed. This checks both those boxes. Businesses come to us and say, hey, we are really concerned about parking. Whether we agree or the data is contradictory, our small business owners are telling us something. I feel like we have a duty to respond to that, given that it's low-hanging fruit, not wasting tax dollars.
So I'm not suggesting we delay this like years down the line. It's just a couple months because we don't really know what's going to happen with Station Square. It's still within the realm of possibility that we may not move forward with the town square concept. So if we're adding all of this parking and not pedestrianizing that plaza, I do feel like we're moving backwards in terms of multimodal improvements.
I guess I would just say we're also losing half of the back parking lot to apartments. So, and we're talking about striping, not changing infrastructure. But we are losing parking. Whatever happens with Station Circle, we've lost half that lot and we're adding 30 plus apartments.
I have to say, as a business owner downtown, everything Cindy's saying makes sense. And if we were talking about spending a lot of money with a lot of heavy infrastructure, that would be one thing, but striping is striping. I mean, it's in-house, it can be easily, changed without a heavy investment in time or money. But right now, our businesses in the downtown are facing a bit of a tough time. And I think the parking, and as a business owner, it's not just the actual parking. Studies can show what they show. The perception of parking or the perception of a parking problem is enough to keep people away. I don't know if you guys remember Manioc and how Manioc kind of. And I remember they had great restaurants and great places, but every time I'd ask a friend, hey, you want to go over to Manioc? And they're like, oh, I can't get parking. And so we go someplace else. And as over time, if you watch what happened there, they just got emptier and emptier and emptier storefronts. And it was the perception of a parking problem killed the business district. And it will kill multiple business districts. I think the upside is greater than the downside. And I think trying it and adding some would be in the best interest of the community.
I think we definitely heard that feedback at the Parks Plan meeting on Wednesday. And that's why I'm also unsure whether this plan is going to move forward or whether it's going to be some sort of compromise plan where we create half of that as parking and half of it as a pedestrian plaza. We're not sure. And I also want to share some feedback that I got from the business owners who are directly adjacent to that.
Okay.
And I've talked to at least 2 business owners that said that the Haverford Avenue parking will not work for them. That's not to say that it won't benefit other businesses in
Right.
total, but both the State Store and businesses right across from Station Square, they did not think that Haverford.
It's interesting because every type of business has its own parking needs. My business has 50-pound or 30 to 50-pound bags. You're not going to park down on Haverford Avenue and walk, blocks with a 50-pound bag. A restaurant may have a different
Right.
experience. A takeout place may have a different experience. So, providing those parking spaces would serve different purposes. Another thought I've had is that we have traditionally had a problem with employees taking up spaces during the day, and those are prime spaces that affect everybody. It's a butterfly effect. So if you provide a place where employees can park, park with that's a block or 2 away, but not horrible, that would ease up the parking in the immediate downtown. So I think again, I recognize what you're saying in terms of not, trying to look, be forward thinking and thinking, trying to multimodal. I want to keep in mind that not everybody's able to walk or ride a bike. There's older people, there's people with infirmities, people with invisible disabilities, that can't always walk that far. And so we kind of cut off the ability for them to shop at our shops, and they spend money too. So I want to be cognizant of or recognize both able-bodied and less able-bodied, and not be ableist, frankly, in terms of cutting down too much parking for people who need it. So I would just want to be cognizant of that.
Mike, did you have?
Yes, I'm on the hot seat. I guess I have a couple of thoughts. First, I'm looking at this from a public health and safety standpoint, not a big picture, what we want Arbor to look at, because we are the public health and safety.
Mhm.
And actually, to be honest, I think public health and safety takes precedence over our aspirational goals to make us a multimodal transportation system. You can't have one without the other. And Haverford Avenue, I think what we're trying to do, in my view, is recognize what already exists. I mean, when there are baseball games and there are big events down there, people are parking willy-nilly all over that street. And so really, by striping, we're removing some of the chaos that exists on a field day. I am terrified of hitting a pedestrian, and people are parked not necessarily well, right? They don't have any guidance. And if we create these spaces, it will be very clear what is a legal space, what is a not a legal space. For me, the even bigger issue is as a traffic calming measure. We sit here every day. It seems like every meeting somebody comes in and says people are driving too fast. We want you to do it. We have 2 traffic studies or 3. At this meeting alone, this doesn't require a traffic study. It doesn't cost any money. Barely any money. And from a traffic perspective, I mean, people go flying down Haverford. If it doesn't work, we take out the stripes.
Yeah.
Let's just do it and see what happens for 3 months or 6 months and revisit the question. And I actually think tying them to the parks plan, it doesn't make any sense to me, quite frankly.
Agree.
Whether or not, wait, Jane, let me finish. I know you disagree with me, but I just don't see that one has anything to do with the other. You're talking about it. Sure, if Station Circle disappears, there's going to be an even greater need for those parking spaces. But if Station Circle stays, I'm in favor of this just as a traffic calming measure. To me, it's irrelevant what happens to Station Circle. This makes inherent sense standing on its own. And we've been putting this off for 3, 4, 5 sessions now. My only question is to Matt, I think I previewed this, is can we move to amend the plan to take into consideration Jean's proposed changes that she suggested, because I think the traffic engineer agrees, at least to the extent that the traffic engineer agrees with that. Like, we don't have, it does have to be an up or down vote, right?
You can propose, this is a less formal action.
Okay.
The more formal action is at council next week.
Okay.
Or at any public meeting. You can propose any updates. You can direct the traffic engineer to, hey, we approve it with these conditions. Does this make sense? If yes, would you please incorporate that in the final plan to be circulated to council for consideration next week?
Larry?
Can I just go like this? I appreciate your refocus, quite honestly. I want to do what he said type of amendment. Exactly for what? Just thinking, we're public health and safety, just thinking of public health and safety. Traffic calming, Mike just said it's a traffic calming tool. That's what we should be evaluating it on. And I do tend to go more economic development tool, but the focus right now is.
To me, the economic development is just a bonus, right? I mean, I'm very sympathetic, I'll say, I'm very sympathetic to both the store owners and the one screaming match you and I had in the past is over ableism and disabled, and I'm a strong advocate for making this town as accessible as possible to the disabled, and so I especially I would love to create 1 or 2 more handicap spaces right in the middle of town, because where are they? They're one like around the corner by the post office.
Essex, yeah.
Right? There's not even one on the main drag at the moment.
That's right.
Okay.
So,
What I was
So,
going
you
to
create
say is
that,
that
you can take a
I'm
space.
not hearing any interest from the committee on tying this in consideration with the Bucks plan. But it sounds like there may be interest for making those revisions that we talked about.
which are exactly what? Just a Sharrow, and then where there's not a parking spot. you're
Well, there's
narrowing
already
it.
a Sharrow in the plan, but it would be narrowing the travel lane to a maximum of 14 feet and creating a shoulder. And then also adding a Sharrow at the intersection of Wynwood Avenue.
I guess I would say I'm not a traffic engineer, so whatever our traffic engineer says we do need, I would support.
And is that comment more focused on the section from the municipal building down to Wynwood? Or is it throughout the entire corridor, just to be clear, because I'm not,
There's no room from Essex Avenue to Dudley.
Yeah.
But everything from Dudley onto Wynwood, there's room for a shoulder.
Mike, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, just to clarify, so I would see the shoulder striping on the north side of the road from Dudley to Conway, and then on the south side, sort of adjacent to the park all the way down to Wynwood. That would be the additional shoulder striping. I do think it does help to sort of guide traffic a little bit and narrow the appearance of a lane. So I think it's a worthwhile addition to the plan. And then the Sharrows would just really be added to the turn lanes up by Wynwood. So I consider those minor changes that we can certainly incorporate if that's part of the decision to move this forward.
And if I could also add, thanks, Mike. If I could also add, staff met with the fire company to look at the turning movements. And they're generally in favor of this. Their only concern had to do with the 9 proposed spaces between Dudley and Conway. And that might need, like the final plan might need to be tweaked. We might need to lose a total of 1 space. What we're gonna do, we're gonna go park some trucks out here and see if the trucks can make that turn. And then we're gonna take those measurements. And so that final count, that 9 might be reduced to 8, in worst case 7, but we're still gonna get something there. We just wanna make sure before we go and stripe it that the trucks actually can do it.
Makes
Great.
sense. And what is
Yeah,
the final-
we take our best guess with the turning templates, but I always recommend in cases like this to actually just go out there, turn the vehicles, and see where you can start the parking.
The only other thing I wasn't clear on, Mike, was when you get down to the Wynwood end, how far back do we have 2 lanes to make the left and the right turn? Because you want to make sure that the people who are turning right don't get stuck in the long line
Which I get every day.
that gets created for the people who are turning left. Quite frankly, I now just avoid that intersection and go around the block to Windsor to make the left, especially in the morning.
In the evening, that's a problem.
Yeah, it's now a problem in the morning too with the start times change. I discovered that the other day for the first time.
So we followed, there's an existing point where no parking prohibition begins on that side, kind of approaching the intersection. So we sort of ended our spaces at that same point where it is today, thinking that was done for that exact reason.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you have proper queuing. So
Yeah.
I can't say it's always going to accommodate the queue.
No,
Because there, but
there are times where you get stuck behind the left turners, but as long as it's in the same space, I couldn't tell from the plan whether it was the same spot or not, so that's.
yeah, we followed that same spot.
Okay.
Okay, so, do we have to restate the question again, or, okay? And then I guess we'll open it up to public comment, because this is an action item, if there's any comments from the public on this specific action item.
Thanks for all the conversation.
Or say
Great
your
stuff.
name and your address, please.
My name is Joseph Stratton. I live at 402 Dudley Ave. Thank you. I agree with moving forward as a public safety initiative as you described, and agree with the advantages of traffic calming and also clarifying where to park. 2 additional thoughts real quick. One is often when I park on the trade track side of the road, the south side of the road, often there's overgrowth, and I think it would be really helpful to clarify where the spaces are and how far out we can park to just avoid that overgrowth. And the other is a question about all-day parking versus 2 or 4 hour parking. The thought is potentially if it's all day, we may have SEPTA riders parking here. I love the idea that employees can park all day, but just thinking through, how to balance that with, do we want SEPTA riders or other people to be parking there? I don't know, just sharing an observation. Thanks.
I mean, I would just say that the SEPTA lot is still pretty empty.
I
There's-
disagree, that's funny. I think it's nice, it's pretty full.
I mean, I took pictures a couple of weeks ago at 8:42 every day for a week, and there were at least 10 spaces left at 8:42.
Well,
And there's nothing,
Yeah.
nothing in this plan for restricted parking on that lot.
Not yet.
Yeah.
So that might be something we might consider.
Yeah, I don't recommend putting restricted parking on it yet. If council moves to approve this plan and it gets deployed, let's watch and see what happens. And I don't wanna go and create a solution for a problem that doesn't
Yeah.
exist yet.
Thank you
And
for
it may
your
change when SEPTA starts charging,
What
which I
is
think
that?
is, have you seen it this month for us?
Yeah, it goes up 100%.
To a whole $2.
$2.
$2.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Are there
can't
any
believe it.
other public comments before?
There will be a couple people who try to avoid paying $2.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Other-
Okay, you have to move on, but, so we're recommending approval of these plans with the revisions that we discussed.
And those final plans will be updated by our traffic engineer and will be forwarded to council for consideration next week.
Great.
If you vote.
Yeah, are we voting?
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all in favor of that? Next, we'll move on to the traffic study review. We have two traffic studies, Windsor and Dudley intersection and 200 block of Rice.
This is all, Mike Schneider again, yep.
It's all you, Mike.
So we did take another look at Windsor and Dudley and measured the site distance, and we do have the parking properly restricted there. So we do think that there is sufficient site distance at that location, and site distance is really the only warrant you would look at there wouldn't meet for volume or any other warrants for a multi-way stop. So I continue to recommend not installing a multi-way stop at that intersection.
There's not much else we can do. We've
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
evaluated this intersection twice and our engineers.
That was the outstanding
Yeah.
thing that we hadn't evaluated for, so we just wanted to make sure we did our due diligence and reviewed for all aspects of any warrants for a four-way stop.
Since this is not an action item, we're going to hold off public comment for action items onto the end of the meeting.
It's not really a comment, it's a clarifying question.
Okay, if,
Like during this study, did you have, like SUVs or trucks parked in the furthermost spots on Windsor? Because that's, I'll grant that when I'm driving through there, it's usually fine when there's not like a full string of cars. But when there are especially large vehicles that are at those end points for the sight lines, that's where it's really, really tough to make it through the intersection or especially to make a left. And just anecdotally, that's also where a ton of like honking and near accidents happen. So again, totally understand if like the sightlines are narrowly, appropriate, but just in the spirit of actually driving around there, just wondering if there's more of like a pragmatic test here as well.
Yeah, so what we do, and that's a great question. So when we go out to measure the site distance, those first spaces, even if there's no one parked there, we assume it's a wall. We assume it's something that you just can't see past and you have to see around it. But just to clarify how we measure the site distance as well, because a lot of those intersections, if you just stop at the stop bar and stop sign, you really can't see anything. And when there's a parking lane, you come back 10 feet off the travel lane. So actually where we measure is probably out sort of middle of the crosswalk, out towards the end of the crosswalk. So you don't have to be back, because if you stopped at the stop sign, it's really, you can't see too much at just about any intersection where you have on-street parking. But when you do have the on-street parking, you're allowed to pull sort of out further than that stop bar and stop sign. That's PennDOT's sort of requirement to do those site distance checks. So we kind of pulled out. It's close. I mean, you need 150. We're right around 150. So even if it were under and wasn't really meeting, our recommendation would be more to eliminate a parking spot or two on either side before going to a multi-way stop at that location. So if it were to be that close that it would just be a parking spot location, and we'd go there instead of a multi-way stop, because it's, multi-way stop should be treated a little bit more as exclusive as opposed to going in at just about every location along there. We have a lot. So we did look at, assuming those first spots were parked with taller vehicles, and again, we measure based on PennDOT's criteria of coming out a little bit and only being 10 feet off the actual travel lane, not the curb.
All right, cool. Thanks.
thank you, Mike. Any other discussion on that? Okay, thanks. And then we have the 200 block of Price Avenue.
Yeah, so we reviewed that, and I prepared a summary memo that you may have been able to review. I just sent it over on Wednesday. But essentially, in that section of price, the roadway narrows a little bit in comparison to other locations along there. I don't know, it looks like it might have happened when some of the, maybe even when the townhomes were built there or something. I don't know exactly when it occurred, but that curb line is out a little bit through there. So PennDOT has criteria based on roadway classification and then the density of the neighborhood or area where the roadway is located. And they have recommendations based on the overall width of the roadway as far as what you can accommodate regarding parking and traffic. So in that type of local road, that type of setting, they call 30 feet a medium width roadway, and they call 26 feet a narrow roadway. And the 30-foot medium width roadway, they recommend parking on both sides, two-way travel, no restrictions. At 26 feet wide, they recommend considering either a parking restriction or converting to one-way if you're in a bit of a higher density area. So getting into density, there are single-family homes along there, but there's also multifamily. So I think you could really go either way with whether or not you're going to call that, sort of the higher density type area. It is a little bit dense through there. I mean, a lot of Narberth is dense compared to other suburban areas. So looking at it and based on the complaints, we're recommending that a parking restriction be considered for a stretch along there where we don't have 30 feet. It could be on either side of the roadway. It wouldn't be a transition of where the center line would be. It would just be some additional parking restriction, which is always tough, as I understand, especially in areas where you need parking. You need on-street parking. It's dependent on that area. So whether or not the borough thinks it's feasible to restrict some spaces in there, the other option would be to go to one-way traffic through there, which is, in my opinion, a bit of a bigger change. That really changes people's circulation patterns and which road they use. So if it can be accommodated, if it can be lived with, I guess is one way to say, we would recommend doing a bit of a parking restriction along there on one side of the roadway. Likely the south side. I mean, just the few times I've been out there, the south side had less parked vehicles than the north side. I don't know why. It could have just been times I were there. Maybe not. Maybe that's not the case, and it would better restrict on the other side. But that would be my initial recommendation if the borough were to move forward with a parking restriction.
And how many spaces would we end up losing there?
I just looked at it the other day, and let me look again. Let me bring it right up so I can see. It would be. By my count, about 11 or 12 spaces.
Wow.
So this was actually talked about a little bit in the 2017 parking study, because we do have a fair number of narrow streets with the similar issues. And they talk about the pros and cons of like the one-way versus the parking restriction on one side. But one thing I want to mention is they do recommend a 60% approval from a petition from the residents. So like if we do consider parking removal, I do think that we should require that we have a petition that supports it from that
Or at
block.
least input. I was gonna suggest, I to do something like taking away 11 spaces on a block, I would want the neighborhood, the people who live on that
They
block
need to
and
be
around the
supportive.
corner to understand these are your choices.
Yeah.
Which would you prefer? Would you rather have this as a traffic measure or, recognizing that puts a burden on you? I don't see it turning it into a one-way. I think that's the, be careful of the consequence, the unintended consequences, because then you're changing traffic flow all over the place.
Mm-hmm. And it would require an additional traffic study
Yeah.
to look at the circulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't wanna speak for those residents, but I can't imagine they're gonna say, take 11 spots from this type of street. I would consider one way before I would that, unless they overwhelmingly said, yeah, take our spots, which I can't imagine.
But I think it's worth letting them know,
Yeah.
right? There's a good communication item for us, I think, is to say, look, we've looked at this, we heard your concerns. This is what the traffic engineer came back with. Going one way doesn't seem practical. What are your thoughts? And I think they'll tell us their thoughts pretty clearly.
Yeah, we'll back out of our driveway a little safer.
We'll figure out what we can do.
So how do we want to move forward? Do we want to go back to I know there were at least like 3 requests, right, through the MyGov portal regarding that.
Chief's handling that, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe we can go back to them and kind of lay out the options, and I do think it would need wide support from that block.
I think if we could even get the contacts from John and we can just share the link to this meeting
Yeah.
and have them give us their thoughts, I would say let's table it until they watch it, get organized and come back to us. We can share this conversation.
And just if I could add, that, that there's no requirement to move these spaces. In my opinion, you don't even get down to the 26 feet. You're more at 27 at the narrowest point. So depending on how you look at density, I wouldn't say that roadway is in violation of PennDOT requirements if you have parking on both sides of two-way traffic. It's more of a comfort factor, and if you're getting complaints, and it's wide to do that. Another potential solution could be if there's intermittent parking restrictions. If we just take a couple spots out here or there, that gives a little bit more room for vehicles to pass each other when you have the two-way traffic coming up. It sounds like when you have 2 cars approaching each other at times, it's really tight. There's almost a stop and who's going first sort of thing. But if you do, if you get rid of 2 parking spaces sort of in the middle of the run, then a few cars later, 2 more parking spaces there, it kind of creates these little bypass areas where you feel a little safer passing another vehicle, and if you kind of slow down and hang out in those. So just another kind of option to consider if the 11, 12 spaces, which is a lot, is too much to bear.
And removing those, like a few spaces, could that also address the issue that they brought up was backing out of their driveways? It affects their sight lines. So that might also improve the sight lines.
For some.
Yeah, it could if we do that in a calculated fashion and see where they're having issues and say, okay, well, if you're having issues backing out of here, maybe these 2 spots are where we ban parking and just kind of hold this as an open area, both for backing out and for cars to pass each other safely.
Okay.
So that's a possibility,
All right. Thanks, Mike. Okay. So is that enough direction that we have for that?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So if there's no other discussion on that, we can move on to the next one. Traffic calming on Iona Avenue. That's also you, Mike.
So we looked at, if you remember we talked last time, the speed hump is in place and it's working really well. I do recommend that when that road is repaved, putting in a standard 12-foot long one to meet PennDOT criteria, but the one that's in there doesn't appear to be causing any trouble, and it's certainly slowing folks down. So I think the speeding has been handled through there. The bump outs were one of the other improvements we talked about, doing curb bump outs. Originally thought it could be dual use for stormwater management purposes, not as much in that area due to the elevation of the location. So we kind of talked about, and I gave a little proposal to do temporary bump outs to see if we'd like them to see if they work using lane separator curb, or it's often called quick curb, which is like a small plastic curb that gets bolted to the ground, and delineators are kind of clicked into that. So that's sort of a much lower cost. I call it an improvement, but it's really leaning towards an improvement. I wouldn't want that as a permanent improvement. That would be put in to see if it works, see if there's benefit, making sure vehicles, especially emergency vehicles, can still turn, making adjustments to them as needed to make sure they're kind of set up the right way. Then if everyone likes it, moving forward with the more expensive permanent solution of curbing those bump outs and landscaping those bump outs. To have a contractor, I provide a little sketch with our memo of how they would look. It's sort of like white plastic curb with delineators put in, and where we think, just an initial look at where we bump out, where the parking ends, we wouldn't take any parking out as part of this. We just use the existing parking restriction areas approaching the intersections to kind of bump out the curb line, temporary curbing. If you hired a contractor to do that, because I've had contractors do quick curb and lane separator curb in different locations, it's expensive. It'd be like $25,000 for them to get the equipment and install it at those 2 intersections. But it could be something that Public Works could potentially take on. It's really just click together, bolt down sort of installation. So it's not a heavy construction installation. There'd be a huge savings to be done by borough staff, because having a contractor come in, $25,000 is not an insignificant amount of money for a non-permanent solution, right, to kind of have those put in. So I definitely recommend, if it's something the borough wanted to move forward with, they'd look to see if it's something that Purpose staff would install.
So I would support Public Works doing something in-house, something temporary, and then.
Yeah, when I saw the 25K price tag for a temporary thing, I was like, oh, and then if we move on, we've just actually effectively increased the price.
Do we know what that cost would be around if Public Works could do it?
You know, I don't. I didn't see an equipment. I looked quickly yesterday because I kind of thought that question might come up, and I wanted to have that on hand. But I called the last contractor I had to put some of these in, and he was going to go through and give me his purchase order, but he didn't send that this morning. I was hoping to get it. So I'm hoping to get that soon, but it would be a whole lot less than $25,000. I think it would be under $10,000 for sure from an equipment standpoint. So.
And I think we have to talk to Jeff and find out.
He was out this week.
Yeah,
This is a Jeff combo.
This is, we're gonna have to defer any thought on this until we get some input from Jeff.
And this I'll point out is another one, as Matt mentioned earlier, that we'd want to, before anything got set or put in out there, turn some vehicles in an emergency vehicle and make sure we're not restricting any turn movements with these. It's the same sort of thing. We can take our best guess with turning templates, but if Public Works is going to do it, we'll probably start with turning a truck out there and seeing where we can actually put these.
I think we should also think, we also said Iona Avenue was kind of the pilot on these measures. Okay, so we piloted the speed hump, that's been successful. I would see this as a pilot, and I say that because as we think about what is our comfort level and how much we would spend, the next question to that is, because it would be repeated in other blocks, right? So this is not just addressing Iona Avenue, but rather proof of concept. I'm thinking over in my head, what would that cost be for me to vote to move this
I
forward?
think I mentioned this before, I'd also be inclined to sort of defer this until the new construction is open, because it's gonna be sort of hard to evaluate until that building is open. There's gonna be new traffic patterns, the daycare center is gonna be open, that street's gonna be used a lot more. I don't wanna put this up before conditions I suspect are gonna drastically change.
Would you be comfortable though, I think it's worth Jeff exploring the cost.
Oh, yeah, no, I think we should be prepared to do it, I just might hold off on implementing
January.
it until that building is open, complete.
So there's two parts to this plan, which is the permanent speed hump and then the temporary bump outs. Would that apply for both?
So the speed humps are replacing the ones that are currently on Iona, and my understanding is that would be tied to the paving.
Yeah.
So I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Do we have a schedule for the?
It's going to be on, I believe, next year's schedule.
Yeah, so that's a little bit down the line, but I think that's fine. I think we've talked about that before.
And Mike, are you not recommending a speed hump on Meeting House Lane? Because I know we've discussed that in past meetings. But I didn't see it on the plan.
Yeah, so you do have a bit of a speeding problem on Meeting House. The 85th, I think, was 31. Usually with PennDOT, with their traffic calming, they recommend that you be at least 10 miles per hour over posted with your 85th before you consider traffic calming. So it really wouldn't hit that threshold. However, these residential streets with parking, 31 feels really fast. So I think if the borough wanted to, they could justify the installation of speed humps on Meeting House. It may be one case where you want to check with the residents and make sure they're on board with those. Not everyone likes them, not everyone wants them. But, with that long stretch, I think a couple of speed humps would help to calm traffic along there. Like I said, it's not excessive speeding, but 31 feels fast. On a residential street with parking on both sides, it does. So I don't think there's a wild speeding issue that you really have to get out there and slow people down with speed humps. But it is something, especially if you're going to be paving or doing work near there, putting them in there, they kind of get cheaper the more you do. So it could be considered if the residents are calling for it in that location.
Do you think there would also be an impact on the traffic volume?
Speed humps usually have minimal impacts on cut-through traffic. It's more speed control. They're kind of done in a way that they're not really supposed to impact your trip that much. Now, if you're going up and down over them and had a whole section, you might want to avoid it. But I wouldn't think it would really deter cut through traffic that much through there.
That's a major
and-
thoroughfare. That's a major thoroughfare
Yeah.
cut through. That's only gonna get worse. to your
Yeah, well,
point.
that's what, that's
So-
what I'm
yeah.
saying, is it's only gonna get worse.
Well, I would be comfortable in that line of thinking, adding the speed humps now, because it's only gonna get worse
Yeah.
when that opens and when the bridge opens. It's certainly not gonna get better.
I also want to point out that the speed hump on Iona did drastically cut down the traffic volume.
It did not do that.
It did.
It cut, Mike, you counted the volume on Iona post speed hump, it was drastic? I missed that.
That was, Public Works did that. Jeff did that.
Or John.
Okay.
Yeah, do you
I was
remember?
saying,
I think
I
it's
found
traffic
no
anyway.
difference.
I think it was almost half, or it was at around 60%.
So it was using our speed signs. So this was not a full-on
Yeah.
traffic engineer out there actually that would be,
Counting.
you know, upheld in a court
Yeah.
level. It was, you know, those speed signs collect all data inside of a cone of collection. So it'll give you a good snapshot, but it wasn't necessarily the most accurate.
Okay.
But if it's 50%.
Yeah, right.
Well,
I'm surprised by that,
No, I think you caught it on a day that.
Well,
people
no,
didn't
so
work,
like
yeah.
we did it like 1 week or 2 weeks, and then we were so flabbergasted, like it must be an error.
Yeah.
So we had him do it again, and it was continued to be the same numbers. So
And what are we comparing it to? Like, when you say it's a reduction, what's our baseline from?
Yeah.
Like,
so they did it before, and then
The speed hump?
after the speed hump was installed.
Yeah, that surprises me. And here nor there, though, I would still really support it on Meeting House.
I mean, it definitely slows the traffic on Meeting House. You know, I remember the first time I went down and I didn't realize the speed humps were there. I'm flying over it, so, you know, say from my own experience, it slows me down.
Couple things. Speed humps, might I recommend that we wait until, to deploy on Meeting House until we get the temporary speed hump made available after the permanent one gets installed next summer. Then we would only have to buy one additional one. If we're thinking about putting two, that would be able to move it, we'd have a location for it. The other comment is having to do with the temporary bump outs. Mike, what's the typical lifetime of the temporary bump outs?
Well, that equipment can last for a long time. They can be on a permanent basis. So PennDOT installs those as lane separators for like a turn lane or so on a state highway, and they're permanent. So that they can be a permanent installation. They're a bit of a maintenance headache because turning cars will hit them and knock them off, but the delineators clip back in pretty easily.
Okay.
The only reason we don't recommend them as a permanent installation in a neighborhood like that is they're a little bit unsightly, right? They look a little oversigned and trafficy. They're not nice to look at as one way. So we always recommend that in a case like this, if you're bumping out or moving a curb line, it's really just to see if it works, adjust them, see where you want them before you're going to put your permanent, curbing and landscaping.
So that's right, thank you. That's where I was gonna go. So just project to council that if you do want to move forward with this temporary, what is your plan? Is your plan, if it works, then yeah, we will invest in putting that permanent bump outs at a cost of $150,000. That's a big nugget.
Yeah.
So don't lose sight of that, right? I just encourage you all to don't lose sight of a temporary fix for something that will then, what are you gonna do when the lifetime of this expires and you're at a decision point where you have to then spend real money to put permanent structures in.
Can I ask a quick question? Mike, you know the crosswalk, the crosswalk signs that we use to narrow the crosswalk? Because those are at both of the intersections that you have proposed the kind of temporary bump outs, but they're constantly moved and on the sidewalk. It does look like you could drill those in similar to what you're proposing here. Would that be kind of a modification to drill those into the street with existing hardware?
Yeah, you mean like the little A-frame placard signs that go up for?
No, these
The
are
pedestrian signs?
they're flat and they
Heavy
help
duty.
people.
Oh, like
Yeah.
the rubber based.
Yes,
Yeah.
the flashy thing that are supposed to be stationary enough, they're quite heavy, to narrow the pedestrian crosswalk and calm that traffic in those intersections that you've identified where you could do a permanent bump out or a temporary. Is there a way to just drill those in as you're suggesting for these temporary?
Yeah, I'd have to look at them just to make sure that they're breakaway and easily replaced. So anything you want to kind of put in like that, like these delineators in the quick curve, if a turning truck or something knocks a few of them down, they can get clipped right back in and stood right back up again. So you just kind of, from a maintenance standpoint, you don't want anything that would get destroyed. But yeah, I've seen those put in the center and drilled in to kind of be permanent there. It's plowing, right? You want to move them when you have to plow and do those sorts of things, or if you have to get a big truck through. So I'm not sure why they move consistently now, but yeah, they can be used as well.
Yeah, think about the plowing.
I have seen cars flatten them.
Flatten, yeah, they do the
Yeah.
flat. Okay. I was just thinking, could we use existing stuff and just make it? Okay.
Pardon me, I'm gonna
Okay,
go.
see you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Bye.
Okay, so, yeah, that's something to think about in the future, but I don't think we're gonna make any decisions today. So if there's no other discussion.
Well, with that, can I just ask, is there a benefit to putting, if Meeting House would require 2 speed humps, we have one that's going to get pivoted from Iona. Is there a benefit to adding one now to Meeting House? And then adding the second one when it becomes available from Iona?
I don't know what those costs are, but yes, I mean, logistically, yes.
Well, we have the cost of what it was for Iona, so we do know what the cost.
I know, I don't personally right now. I
Oh,
don't.
like right now, no, but somewhat, okay. Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah,
If Jeff was
that's a
here, he'd
good
know.
idea, right? If we're thinking of 2, we could at least put,
Put one now and then change, although that other one on Iona's got pretty beat up, but.
Yeah.
I would be in support of that because Meeting House
I'm
is.
willing to consider that.
Yeah,
We have
Mike-
to see what kind of shape that,
yeah.
The
Mike,
current-
is that doable? Could you do one without the other?
You could do one without the other, although you'd want to place the one sort of with the understanding that another one's coming at some point.
Yeah.
Right? So you'd have a bit of a gap there. The only issue is if you have a long stretch without properly spaced speed humps, you sometimes get an effect of higher speeds in the area where you don't have the speed bump, where people are kind of making up time a little bit, you know. So that'd be the only caution, but overall, I don't see an issue with that. We could find a location to put the one sort of best spot and then supplement with another. I mean, you might put one in, and that might generally slow the traffic on there, and you might not need a second one too. I mean, you can kind of do it however you'd like. I just recommended at least 2, based on the length of roadway in my experience. That if you don't have them spaced closely enough on a longer stretch like that, you can end up increasing speeds. I've seen that happen because people go up over it, then they have a long stretch where they don't have it, they hit the gas a little bit.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I would support that. And you know what? There's Little Feet coming in with the daycare. That's a popular bike route. That's a popular crossing point for General Wayne. If we're gonna do anything, I would personally really support doing that.
Okay. All right, so any other discussion on that?
Is it, what are we doing, I guess? What's
I
the-
mean,
Hey,
well.
So there's no action. If
Yeah.
this council, or if this committee wants to make a recommendation to move that to council, somebody could make that recommendation. This is just a recommendation board. This is not,
Well, I mean,
binding.
for us, are we asking Jeff to give us a price for one?
Yeah,
speed
how
hump?
quickly-
We need to find out
How
what the
quickly do you
costs
wanna
are.
Do you want, or would you like to direct staff to develop a proposal and a location, and that this committee could review at the next?
Yeah,
Meeting.
I think that's great.
All right. And I don't think there's any action needed about the temporary bump outs yet. I think that's another thing that council should consider. That would be related to the capital improvement plan, a bigger discussion, but we have those data and we can ask Jeff in coordination with Mike to get more realistic numbers if Public Works would install it. So we could also present that at the next meeting as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and can we use what we have and drill them down, or could we use the plant?
Yeah, that's where Jeff would be able to say,
Yeah,
hey, look, we have X, Y, Z. Yep.
Yeah, I would like Jeff to take a look at this and give us a recommendation too, yeah.
Okay. All right, next item, ped bike accessibility, mainline greenway update. So I think Public Works was looking into getting estimates for the signage implementation.
The recurring
Any-
theme,
any
Jeff was
update?
out this week.
Okay. Okay, so we'll check back next
Yeah.
month.
You really realize how much you miss a guy
I know,
when he's
right?
not here, right?
And then, the Lower Marion Narberth Active Transportation Plan, any update on when the next meeting is?
No, we were supposed to meet yesterday and they canceled,
Okay,
so I'm just like kind of on standby at this point.
okay. And then I just do wanna mention really quick, that we did receive the Safe Streets for All, grant for Lower Marion and Narberth, for the stretch of Montgomery Avenue, so, that will be on the horizon to talk about. I think we're just waiting for Lower Marion to have a grant agreement and figure out what the specifics are for that plan. Okay, committee reports, anything from Shade Tree Commission, any update?
Hi, I'm Dawn Weisberg.
I don't.
301 Windsor and a new member of the teacher group. Hudson was coming too, so, I think the only, well, we have a tree planting coming up soon, so if you or anybody you know wants a tree for their yard, let us know, I'll plant it. And the other thing is with, when people are getting, citations for having overgrowth of their sidewalk, or trees in their sidewalk, the Shade Tree Commission had questions like, kind of whatever how to do it, but if the citation is going out, maybe information that the Shade Tree is happy to come advise about how to prune, how far off, 8 feet and over that you need to be pruned. So just in the education.
Is that something that, the Shade Tree Commission can, do an educational outreach on, or
And you're
are you?
actually doing an event this, tomorrow at Shift about tree
Okay.
pruning in general and the Narberth guidelines for how far your tree limbs should be up off their sidewalk.
Okay.
But I wonder, Dawn, could the Shade Tree provide language that we could just include with the citation?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
I think
like
we'd
a
be
little
happy to do
brochure.
that. We didn't know if that was like too much office.
Yeah, I think Rick had said that you guys would develop something that we could attach to the door hanger notice that goes on the door. Just to be clear, that's not a citation, the citation's an actual fine. But
Okay,
like the notice that gets left at the premises, yeah, it'd be good if we could have that prepared from you guys. And it's a more friendly approach versus just like, hey, you're gonna do this or you're gonna receive a fine.
okay.
Yeah. So,
Try to go back to it.
okay.
Okay. And then what time is that event for tomorrow?
It's 12
12 at Shift.
at Shift,
Okay.
Mother Compost is also.
Okay, thank you. And then EAC, we do have that letter. So did you want to, or I could talk about it?
Sure, whatever you would prefer. So that, there was a request from the EAC to ask council to consider updating the ordinance establishing the EAC to allow for a member who is a non-resident of the borough. We do have some other advisory boards that allow for that same provision. Specifically, we have a member who is moving outside of the borough and would like to stay involved. And the EAC would like that person to stay involved as well. And I think this is a pretty easy thing for council to consider. And if this committee agrees, you can direct me to put that on as a consideration for next week to have the solicitor draft an update for that ordinance.
And also there's a letter of support from the chair of EAC, Joe Toscano. In the interest of time, I may not read the letter, but it's included in the packet.
Yep.
I know, I would definitely support, I think it makes sense, she's such a valuable asset to the
Yeah.
EAC, and we're in the middle of this, the CCA process, and she's been invaluable to that process, so we would not want to lose her from that role.
So is that the direction of the council that you would like to see this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Consider,
Yes,
okay,
for
great,
sure.
thank you.
Okay.
I don't think we need a formal action, they can take care of that, thank you.
And then Police Advisory Committee, any report?
So we were going forward with investigating 311 as an option. I think that it was in the report stating that, there's a real disconnect between the police wanting us to use 911 and the public perception. The initial look-see that John String did on that was that the cost would be too high because it would require a second administrator. I'm not exactly sure what's in place on the Montgomery County level, but for now, the approach is gonna be sort of a public service, just trying to get out the word, or that 911 is what you should call for everything. This is gonna take, now that we're not exploring 311 any further at the moment, we really need to look more at this, because this is like a big issue. I know it sounds weird, but they want everyone to call 911, and I can tell you, my kid is not picking up the phone to call 911 for a minor thing.
We see it constantly on Facebook where
Yeah.
people say, what's the non-emergency number?
Exactly.
And I post at least once a month to say, there's no such thing,
They
just
call
call
911.
911.
Well, which is why something like a 311 where communities have it makes sense, because people want a non-emergency number, and it's easier than looking up 10 digits. This is where we're at right now. I think in my head is more Tindall rather than Deb exploring this, but
Okay.
at the moment that's where it is.
And I think that's related to the charge that we will provide to the Police Advisory Committee too, because it's just communications, and I think part of that will be a web page on the borough website that kind of has all of that official information, and it'll be a resource that people can be pointed to because I think people just don't trust the rumors, like they're not sure, like, can you call 911, can you not? So to have something definitive on the borough website, I think that would be really helpful.
I think it's important for us to partner with Lower Marion also, because if this is sort of emerging protocol, we need to get the message into the schools, right? I mean, we need to teach our kindergartners that they call 911 to get the police regardless of whether it's an emergency or not. I mean, this is, deep-seated, we think of 911 as emergency.
People are like,
Curious
I don't want
George,
to call
getting in trouble.
for, something silly,
Right.
I mean, I feel that, right?
Yeah, everyone does. I mean, I think that is because it's really ingrained in us. So it may be important for us to partner with Lower Marion on sort of community education on this.
And this is not a topic to discuss now, but I'll plant the seed because I do think at some point we should revisit it. Jean, John String, and I actually visited with the City Ave bid district on community resource officers. They are not, I wish Andrew was here because she's like, they're mall cops. They're not mall cops. What they are is just that, community resource officers. It's someone on a bike that rides around and you say, hey, there's a dead fox in my yard, I don't want to call 911, and the officer says, no, that's right, we'll call animal control, let me put the ticket in. So it actually decreases 911 call to services on things that truly are not an emergency. So it's actually a tool to reduce the burden of policing. Again, not something we can talk about now, but there is a possibility of kind of expanding that role into the Narberth community for non-police.
Well, this raises a whole other issue that I was talking to John String about, that, and we're also waiting for this charge, because we're in this weird position that I see things that are emerging, and the communication line or what you want us to be doing is a little bit under there also. But, even bike patrol, there are issues with getting their patrol officers retrained on bike patrol because there are very few training programs for that type of thing, and the cost of doing it then becomes an issue. So you raise this other person doing bike, but we also can increase the amount of visibility with having additional police officers certified and.
Right, these are not police officers.
I understand, I understand, but it, to me, is like an extension of that there may be, whether or not we need to hire an additional person or increase our visibility of our existing officers. It needs to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, again, a later conversation, but this is more of a truly nothing to do with police. But you could put it in public works for that matter, in saying, here's a communication tool from the borough. I would actually say completely devoid of police, this isn't a PAC topic.
Got it,
This is a communication topic
Excellent.
that will ultimately free up the police for, there's a dead squirrel, can you come get it? Calls. But anyway,
So, thank you for that.
Oh, I'm sorry, just
Yeah,
one
yeah.
other thing,
Oh,
just
sure.
with the website,
Mhm.
we do need, the determination was made that there needs to be a truly anonymous comment option on that. And I know that Katie Skeen had worked that out, and we were sort of waiting to see what was happening.
Yeah, that was done.
That was done,
Yep.
all done, excellent, done.
Oh, it's already up on the
Yeah,
website?
through MyGov, it's an option.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
oh, anonymous?
Yeah,
Yeah, I've used it.
thank you.
Yep.
Sure.
I'm going honest.
Can I just clarify from the discussion at the beginning, when will we be getting the draft
Today.
today? Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Just want to verify I was looking at the most updated one before I send it out.
I think that's great practice.
Yeah.
I support that.
Alright. Well, thanks, Rebecca. Moving on to departmental reports. Packets the reports are in the packet for fire department and police report.
And we missed one, the update to the carbon pricing from $100 to $150.
Oh, yeah, what is that?
That was,
Yeah.
that had been submitted to this committee months ago, and it had just gotten lost in the transition of 2023. This was a recommendation from the EAC. Remember, the carbon pricing is anytime the borough purchases anything that is not electric, we would do a calculation and contribute that carbon pricing offset to the green fund. So every purchase that we've made, Public Works, we'll take that out of the capital fund and deposit it into the green fund. Currently, it's at $100, and they are recommending that it goes up to $190. So if this is something the committee feels strong about, I would recommend that we put it on next month's committee agenda as an action item, and then you can make that recommendation to council the following month.
So EAC did provide a memo
They did.
regarding that and the rationale behind it.
Yes.
And it falls in line with a lot of things that are happening regionally as well, so it's not.
I just don't see it as a pressing issue right now.
Right.
Which is why I'm not saying, oh, let's bring it to council next month. Because there is that memo, I do think there's value in you all reviewing the memo and having a more informed discussion prior to taking action on it. So that'd be my recommendation to move this to next month.
Alright,
Any initial thoughts?
My initial thought is right now I want to get through a second solid budget cycle and revisit this in a year. With that said, I haven't read the memo and the justification, and while I appreciate it, we just developed a CIP plan. We're just going into our second solid budget year. It's not pressing. I'm proud of us for doing this, but doubling it, or almost doubling it at this time, I'm comfortable saying, can we pause? We have a lot on our plate and revisit this next budget season.
It's your decision.
I haven't read the memo, so
I preface with that
I guess I
having-
wanna, we can put it on the agenda for next month, table it, if that's what we decide to do. I guess, I'd rather have it on the agenda and potentially table it than, I don't think it's gonna, right, than to automatically say, no, we're not gonna do it.
Yeah, I think it's something that we can kind of slowly look at, and also it would be helpful to know exactly what the budget impact would be. Because, so basically it would go into a green fund every time we buy like an ICE vehicle or some public works equipment, right? Is that, or,
It's just a flat rate regardless of the equipment?
No, you take, there's a spreadsheet.
Okay.
So you take the.
That's why I was confused about the price, because
I know,
that
right?
price isn't the price, right?
No,
Okay.
No, that's the value that you use based upon other criteria, the type of vehicle, the size of the engine, vehicle miles traveled, miles per gallon. It goes into a spreadsheet,
Okay,
plug
so
and chug. and
I would
here's the
say
value.
right now, I do not think it is a good use of Matt's time to give us a budget estimation on this, and that I would say, let's revisit this after our budget, because I'm not comfortable making a decision without that estimation. I don't think that is a good use of the office's time at this point.
We don't have any expected ICE purchases right
okay.
now also, so
Okay,
it's not,
so let's
and we
defer.
don't make a lot of purchases either. So it's not something that is gonna generate a lot of revenue for the Green Fund. We're buying a police EV, nope, it's disqualified, so, there's, it's not a pressing issue.
Okay, let's defer till after the first of the year.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I think that's it. I'll open it up for public comment, if there's anyone here who wants to make a comment. No?
I do.
Oh,
For three, real quick. First, I wrote them down to be quick. The handicap parking, I'd encourage the borough to think about adding a handicap parking spot on the 200 block of Haverford. Just feels more welcoming, rather than people who might have to park elsewhere, when all businesses or major businesses are, on Haverford. Joe Stratton, 402 Dudley. I live at Dudley and Price, and I just want to comment on the Dudley-Windsor intersection and the Price Avenue conversation. Dudley and Windsor, great conversation. I'd encourage the board to think about the suggestion of maybe removing 2 parking spots on the north side of Windsor on either side of the Dudley intersection. I thought the conversation was interesting, as Mike said, that when there are, as a cyclist, walker, driver, when there are large vehicles, it is hard to see that around that intersection. The other is the 200 block of Price. Since last month, I've been thinking about the conversation about one-way. I'd encourage the board to consider one-way on Price going east on that 200 block. We have Sabine as a one-way coming west. We also have Woodbine as a two-way as options. And just over the last month, I've been seeing myself increasingly avoid the 200 block of Price because of the difficulty and the concerns about just safety of driving on it, and found that it's easy to access other routes without any real problem, and I find it much safer to do so. My biggest concern in making it one-way would be increasing cut-through traffic on Wayne Avenue, which is a very small residential block. Aside from that, I again would just encourage considering making the 200 block of Price a one-way going east, just for improved safety there. Thank you.
thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. So, I guess, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
And all in favor? And we are adjourned at 11:18 a.m. Sorry. Wrong.